Okay, hi there. I'm back. What we're gonna do now is I think we've heard enough about like the history of science and stuff about chemicals and man, chemicals. Let's talk about the mind. In order to relate this stuff that we were saying about theory replacement, the two kinds of relationships between old and new theories, reduction and elimination. Um, in order to apply that to the mind and also to neurophilosophy, we have to think about what the relevant theories are. And because in order to talk about reduction and elimination, you need to have two theories and talk about relationships between the terms in the theories. So, what are the two theories going to be? One theory is going to be a theory from neuroscience, and let's just call the theory neuroscience, neuroscientific theory. And maybe it's going to be a future version of neuroscience. Maybe we don't know enough yet about neuroscience to really do the reduction or the elimination that we want to do. So the neuroscience we need to focus on is like some perfect, awesome neuroscience, the kind of neuroscience that Mary knew about when she was in her black and white room. That kind of neuroscience, and I'll just call that neuroscience right now. It'll eventually get there. It'll be awesome. You guys will love future neuroscience. So that's our one theory, and that's the new theory. But what's the old theory? The theory that we're going to be talking about, the relationship uh, to neuroscience. And that theory is going to be something that philosophers call folk psychology. Folk is, the people, just regular, common, everyday people, people like me. And the uh, the idea of folk psychology is that this is the kind of theorizing about the mind that everyday people do. It's like common sense psychology, as opposed to experimental psychology, where you've got people in lab coats that are running experiments in laboratories, and they have control groups, and they're doing all sorts of stuff with machines and putting electrodes in your head. That sort of psychology is not folk psychology. Folk psychology is common sense psychology, psychology that you might use to explain like why your friend didn't call you last night. What's going on there? You were expecting a phone call. You were hoping they would call you, but they didn't call you, and you might wonder why. Why didn't my friend called me last night? And you would say, well, maybe my friend had a TV show that they wanted to watch, and they remembered that the show was on that night. And so notice that what we've done, we're explaining some behavior. We're explaining the behavior of not making that phone call. And in giving the explanation of the behavior, we're talking about some mental states of the friend. We're saying that the friend wanted to watch the TV show. That's a mental state, wanting something, wanting to watch TV. And the friend also remembered that their TV show was on that night, and that's another mental state, memory. A general way of talking about folk psychology is that it's a kind of explanation of human behavior that makes reference to beliefs and desires. So, in the case of the friend that didn't call, we would say that the friend desired to watch the TV show, and the friend believed that the TV show was on that night. And so we've got these two kinds of mental states, beliefs and desires, and that we make reference to the beliefs and desires to account for the behavior. So this is folk psychology. This is the way people have been talking about each other for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. And I bet if you look in really old books, like I don't know, the Bible or something, maybe even the Iliad, the Odyssey, you would see people talking about what so and so wanted. You know, like they wanted to sack Troy. Why did they do it? Because they felt like it. There you go. Folk psychology has been around forever, and so there's a theory, folk psychology, and here's another theory, neuroscience, the perfected neuroscience of the future that Mary knows all about. Maybe one day we will all know about. And so there's two options for how these theories are going to be related. The one option is the reductionist option. That's going to say that when we have this perfect, completed neuroscience, we're going to find out what beliefs and desires are. That beliefs and desires are really a kind of brain state. So that when the friend believed that the TV show was on, they were in brain state 752, and when they had a desire to watch the TV show, that was brain state 12. And when you have brain state 752 and brain state 12, that's going to result in behavior 18. Everyone knows that. So that's a reductionist view of the solution to the mind-body problem. That's the reductionist flavor of neurophilosophy. And the example that we're focusing on there, it has to do with propositional attitudes. Propositional attitudes are these things like beliefs and desires, where you have an attitude like believing or desiring, and it's an attitude toward a proposition. The proposition in this case is that the TV show is on, so I believe that the TV show is on. And then another proposition might be Pete Mandic is watching the TV show. I desire that Pete Mandic is watching the TV show is a way of spelling out the proposition part of the propositional attitude of my wanting to watch the TV show. But there are other sorts of mental states, maybe, besides the propositional attitudes. There might be these mental states like pain or being sad. And the reductionist neurophilosopher says that pain is going to reduce to a kind of brain state. And the kind of example that gets talked about in the philosophical literature is that pain is identical to C fibers firing. And if you read my book, I get into a little bit of the history about why that's wrong. But we talk that way anyway. In philosophy, we use that example, even though those of us who've really looked into it appreciate that the example's most certainly false, that pain is not identical to C fibers firing. But who cares? It's a nice, cute little example. So the reductionist says that this conscious experience or this sensation is identical to C fibers firing. So that's reductionist neurophilosophy. It says, here's how you solve the mind-body problem. It turns out all this mind stuff is just identical to certain kind of brain stuff. Mental states are identical to brain states, and that's why we call it mind-brain identity theory. But we could also call it reductionistic neurophilosophy. So what's the option? Like, if you're not going to reduce mental states to brain states, what are you going to do instead when the perfect future neuroscience comes along? Well, the other option is elimination, eliminative materialism. Now, this is kind of far out, but the proposal is that folk psychology is similar to caloric theory or Elan Vital theory or the theory of the luminiferous ether, that it's talking about stuff that doesn't actually exist. Just like there was no such thing as caloric and there's no such thing as the luminiferous ether, it's going to turn out that there's just no such thing as beliefs. There's no such thing as desires. There's no such thing as propositional attitudes. When we have the perfected neuroscience and we explain your friend's behavior in terms of brain state 712 and also brain state 18, we're not talking about beliefs and desires. Beliefs and desires don't exist. The only things that exist are these brain states. So that's a propositional attitude version of eliminative materialism that says that when you've got the new theory that comes in, it's just going to eliminate reference to the things that were talked about in the old theory. Neuroscience is going to replace folk psychology. There's not going to be a smooth reduction. You're not going to retain the big pieces of folk psychology and translate them into the language of neuroscience. Instead, you're going to just get rid of them. You're not going to talk about beliefs anymore. You're going to say, hey, we used to think beliefs existed, but now we know that they don't exist. And another version of this is, instead of being about propositional attitudes, it's about qualia, or conscious experiences. So instead of saying that pain is identical to C fibers firing, the eliminative materialist says there's no such thing as pain. There are no pains. There's no such thing as a qualia. So a really fun article is an article by Dan Dennett called Whining Qualia, and it's named after Quine. And the idea in Whining Qualia is to argue that there's just no such thing as qualia. If you think about what people have claimed about qualia, and then you go looking for that in the brain, you're going to find out there's just no such thing. There's nothing in the brain that answers to the description of what qualia were supposed to be. So that there's different ways of being an eliminative materialist. There's different ways of eliminating mental stuff in favor of this purely physical or neuroscientific description. There's other ways of being a eliminative materialist. And if you're familiar with the free will debates, and there's people that say, look, there's just no such thing as free will. You could view that as a kind of eliminative materialism, that they're eliminating free will talk. And you don't say that there's such a thing as acting freely or willing freely. The reason that you are reaching into the refrigerator to grab a sandwich is not because you chose it of your own free will. There's just no such thing as free will. All there is your brain, and your brain has got certain states, and it causes your muscles to move in a certain way. And next thing you know, you're eating a sandwich, and it's not because there's any such thing as free will. So there we go. We've got our two flavors of neurophilosophy. There's the reductionistic one that retains folk psychological concepts. It says, yes, there still is going to be such a thing as beliefs and desires and conscious experiences. Beliefs, desires, and conscious experiences turn out to be identical to certain kinds of brain states. The other kind of neurophilosophy says, no, folk psychology, it sucks. It's just stupid. If you really think about what a belief would be, it turns out there just can't be beliefs. There's nothing in the brain that would be a belief. There's nothing in the brain that would be a desire. The kinds of explanations that people give of behavior in terms of beliefs and desires, it's just they're not really explanations. You want a real explanation, explain it in terms of what the brain is doing and the way that the brain states relate to the information coming in and the behavior going out. And there you go, you're done. You don't have to talk about beliefs or desires. You're not going to find anything in the brain that seems similar to what beliefs were supposed to be or what desires are supposed to be. Similarly, you're not going to find anything in the brain in the central nervous system that is a qualia. That's an intrinsically undefinable, subjectively knowable. It's not. Nope, not there. Nothing like it. There's just brains. There are ultimately the most hardcore version of eliminative materialism says there's nothing mental. There's only things that are physical. So let's stop there. We've got our two flavors of neurophilosophy, and one of them is reductionistic, that corresponds to the mind-brain identity theory. The other one is eliminativistic, that corresponds to eliminative materialism. And these two different flavors of neurophilosophy correspond to Chapter 6 and Chapter 10 of the book. This is Philosophy of Mind, written by yours truly. This is Professor Mandic. I'm going to go shovel some snow. Enjoy yourselves.